that's the talk on stress. That's the talk about what the major stressors are. It's going to be for you individually, those of you that are dealing with some of these issues, to decide whether what I have to say resonates with you at all, whether it in any way describes your life. I think a question that the stress researchers in fertility need to ask a lot more often is, what kind of childhood did you have? But with some kind of an ear for hearing what's between the lines. Because if you asked Pamela Wallman, she said she had a perfect childhood. And yet, she had to put up with being sexually abused in the classroom. Or shut into a dark room by her sister for years. If you ask, there was a couple that came to me for counseling about their 9-year-old daughter a couple of weeks ago. And it's a melded family where they both have children from other marriages. This 9-year-old is the woman's daughter, and she probably has ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which in my view occurs because of stresses in the family in the early years of life that actually affects how the child's brain develops. I mean, I have ADD, and I had a very stressful first year of life. Going to medical school and all that, you know, Jewish parents. According to the Jewish tradition, when life actually begins, you've heard this one? It's when the son enters medical school. Anyway, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, the woman in the emergency ward. Oh no, sorry, the couple came to me for counseling with their daughter. And I said, well, how was the first 3 years of your life of your daughter? And she said, oh, it was idyllic. It was perfect. I wasn't stressed at all. Well, she separated from her husband when the daughter was 4 years old. And it stands to reason that nobody leaves an idyllic marriage. Turns out that the husband, the first husband, the father of the child, has severe ADHD and was emotionally a complete child. But this woman was in this pattern of having been a caretaker all her life. She never distinguished that the pressure on her to emotionally care for her husband at the same time as she was breastfeeding and coddling a young infant was actually a source of significant stress to her. So we need to ask people about their childhood. We need to ask people about not just do you feel anxious and do you feel stressed, but how do you live your life? How much time do you have for yourself? How much do you talk about your emotions? Who do you have to share with? When you're really upset, who can you tell? Is there anybody that will listen and just listen instead of giving you all kinds of advice you didn't ask for? How do you relate to work? Can you let go of it? Or are you driven by it? I mean, as somebody who certainly has not the inborn trait, because nobody has it inborn, but the ingrained trait, which I deal with, but not always successfully, of say, workaholism, I know how stressful that can get. And yet, one craves it. Sometimes we crave the things that stress us. These are some of the questions that people need to ask of couples who are dealing with infertility, not to mention, of course, how's your relationship? Really, how's your relationship? It's okay. Whenever somebody tells me that, I say, oh, that bad, eh? And you have to ask yourself whether any of this resonates with you. And if it does, great. And if it doesn't, well then, I hope the talk was still interesting to you. Let me come to the end with some of the good news here. And there's actually been, despite the claim in some of the literature that the role of stress and so on has not been proven, and by certain scientific standards that may be true, there's actually have been significant treatment successes using mind-body approaches. One such study was done at Harvard, and within 6 months of completing this mind-body program, when I say mind-body, I mean group discussions, individual psychotherapy, body work like yoga and relaxation exercises for home, which incidentally, the husbands seem to participate in every aspect of this process except the relaxation at home. For some reason, that's the one the men didn't want to participate in. But in any case, in this group, within 6 months, 34% of the women became pregnant, which is much higher than would have left to themselves. And similar results have been duplicated elsewhere. Here's another study that was published in 2000 in the Journal of Fertility and Sterility. They looked at 184 women who were trying to get pregnant, and they divided them into 3 groups. In 2 groups, there was group therapy of different sorts, and in the 3rd group, they just had the conventional medical treatment. And in the 2 treatment groups, the psychological support groups, there were really high. Let me just find the actual results. 55% in one group and 54% in the other group achieved pregnancy, as opposed to only 20% in the group that did not receive that psychological support, which again ought to be an indication that emotional factors can, in some significant number of cases, play a significant role, and that addressing these emotional factors by a total mind-body approach. Now, I don't know a whole lot about Chinese medicine, Lauren, but what I read about it is that it's not just sort of needles being stuck into the body. They recognize energy fields and energy flows that Western medicine doesn't talk in that language, but nevertheless which correspond to events that one could make of physiological sense. And the treatments are not just mechanical ones, but they do address blockages in the body and energy flows and all that, which I little understand, but I know very well in my guts that they exist. That's Chinese medicine, and others will say a lot more about that. The long and short of it is that there's ample evidence that emotional stress affects the reproductive cycle, that it affects hormones, that therefore it can affect fertility patterns, and that addressing these factors from a total mind-body perspective can actually make a significant difference in pregnancy. And I think there'll be a lot more information on that as more people pick up the ball and carry it and work with it. So I think if I were struggling with the issue of fertility, I would want to be open to looking at all of this stuff with an open mind, decide whether it means something to me or whether it doesn't, but I wouldn't rule out anything. And I certainly would, and I'd say this in general, I wouldn't restrict the treatment modalities to the approaches that Western medicine has to offer, miraculously useful as those can be. So I'm not either decrying them or advising against them, but that, sort of like Hamlet said, there's a lot more in this world, Horatio, than our philosophy dreams of. Thank you.